The alarm screamed at 5:15 a.m., sharp and relentless, slicing through the quiet dark like a blade. She didn't groan or roll over. She was already half awake, her body trained by years of early mornings and late nights. Before even opening her eyes, she reached out instinctively to the other side of the bed. Empty, as always. But that wasn't what mattered now. What mattered was the small, warm shape curled up in the twin bed across the room. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples. Her head throbbed faintly. Not from illness, but from the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones when you've been running on fumes for too long. The kind that doesn't go away with coffee or sleep because there's never quite enough of either. She padded barefoot across the cold floor, careful not to creak the loose board near the door. In the dim glow of the nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, she watched him sleep. Mouth slightly open, one arm flung over his stuffed dinosaur, legs tangled in the blanket. At 5 years old, he still believed monsters lived under the bed, but also that his drawings could fly if he taped them to the ceiling fan. She smiled, just for a second before the weight of the day crashed back in. Today was the day. The big presentation. The one she'd been preparing for since last month. The one her boss had called career-defining. She'd stayed up until 2 a.m. rehearsing her lines, tweaking slides, triple-checking numbers. She needed this to go well. Not just for a promotion, though that would help, but because she needed to prove again that she belonged here. That she could do this job, raise this child, and still show up fully, even when the world gave her no margin for error. She tiptoed back to her room, pulled on yesterday's slacks and a clean blouse, and started the coffee. While it brewed, she checked her phone. One new message from the preschool. Her stomach dropped. Due to unforeseen staffing shortages, Little Sprouts Academy will be closed today. We apologize for the inconvenience. She read it 3 times as if the words might change. They didn't. No, she whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool kitchen counter. Not today. Please, not today. She called her backup babysitter first, her neighbor, Mrs. Lynn, voicemail. She left a rushed, slightly breathless message, then called again. Nothing. Next, her cousin. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I've got my own kid homesick. Fever's back. She scrolled through her contacts, heart hammering. Friends? Most worked 9-to-5 jobs like hers. Family? Her mom lived 3 states away. Her dad? Well, he hadn't been in the picture since before her son was born. She stood in the kitchen, coffee forgotten, staring at the wall. Options ran through her mind like frantic mice in a maze. Could she take him to the office? Absolutely not. Company policy was clear. No children during business hours unless it was a pre-approved family event. And even then, only in the lobby or break room, not in client meetings. She'd seen a colleague get written up last year for bringing her toddler to work during a snowstorm. The woman never quite recovered her standing after that. But what else could she do? Cancel the presentation? Her boss would be furious. Worse, the client might take their business elsewhere. And with it, her chance to move up. To finally get a raise that could cover after-school care without leaving her broke by month's end. She looked at the clock. 5:45 a.m. She had less than an hour before she needed to leave. She walked back to her son's room and gently shook his shoulder. Hey, sweetie. Wake up. He blinked, squinting in the soft light. Is it morning? Yeah, buddy. Big day. She kept her voice light, cheerful even though her insides felt like tangled wire. We've got a little adventure today. His eyes lit up. Like a field trip? Kind of, she said, forcing a smile. You get to come to work with me. He sat up instantly, suddenly wide awake. Really? Can I wear my dinosaur boots? Of course, she said, relief and dread twisting together in her chest. She moved fast, packing his backpack with crayons, a coloring book, 2 granola bars, a juice box, his favorite action figure, and a change of clothes, just in case. She made him toast with extra peanut butter, brushed his teeth, combed his hair, which stuck up in the back no matter what, and zipped him into his jacket. All the while, her mind raced. What if someone sees us in the lobby? What if he makes noise during the meeting? What if I get fired? She buckled him into his car seat, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, You're going to be so good today, okay? Just stay quiet and draw pictures. Mommy has a really important job to do. He nodded solemnly. I'll be a ninja. She laughed, a real laugh, brief but genuine, and started the car. The drive to the office was quiet except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional hum from the back seat as he pretended his action figure was flying. She rehearsed her opening lines under her breath, but her focus kept drifting to the rearview mirror, watching him. He looked so small, so trusting. He had no idea how much was riding on the next few hours. When they pulled into the parking garage, she took a deep breath. "Okay, Ninja. Remember, quiet voice, walking feet, and you stay right next to me." He gave her a thumbs up. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt endless. She held his hand tightly, her palm damp. The doors opened to the sleek, modern lobby of Viridian Dynamics. Polished floors, abstract art on the walls, the faint scent of expensive coffee and disinfectant. A few early arrivals glanced their way. One woman raised an eyebrow. Another quickly looked away. She kept walking, head high, pretending this was normal, pretending she wasn't about to break a rule that could cost her everything. She slipped into the empty conference room, the one reserved for her team's 9 a.m. pitch. She set up her laptop, plugged in the projector, arranged her note cards. All the while, her son sat quietly at the far end of the long table, already coloring a T-Rex with 3 eyes and a jetpack. For a few minutes, it almost felt okay. Then her manager walked in. He stopped short when he saw the boy. His expression shifted from surprise to disapproval in less than a second. "What's he doing here?" he asked in a low, tight voice. She stood up quickly. I know, it's not allowed. But the preschool closed this morning and I had no one." "This is a client meeting," he cut in, glancing at his watch. "Big one. You know that." "I do," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I'll keep him quiet. He's got his coloring stuff. He won't make a sound." Her manager crossed his arms. "It's not just about noise. It's about professionalism. What if the client walks in and sees a kid at the table? It looks unprepared, sloppy." The word stung. Sloppy. As if she hadn't spent weeks preparing. As if she'd chosen this. Before she could respond, 2 more team members entered, followed by the department head. All of them did a double take when they saw the child. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone chuckled nervously. Her face burned. She stepped closer to her manager, lowering her voice. "Please, just this once. I'll sit him in the corner. He'll be invisible." Her manager sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I get it. Single parent, no backup, but rules are rules. You should have called in sick. And lose the pitch?" she whispered fiercely. "After all this work? After everything I've done to prove I can handle this role and be a mom?" He didn't answer, just shook his head and walked toward the coffee machine, leaving her standing there exposed. She turned back to her son. He was watching her, crayon paused mid-stroke. "Are you in trouble, Mommy?" "No, baby," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "Everything's fine, but it wasn't fine." She felt the walls closing in. The polished table, the expensive chairs, the framed degrees on the wall, they all seemed to whisper the same thing. "You don't belong here." She glanced at the clock. 8:45 a.m. The client would arrive in 15 minutes. The CEO might even stop by. He often did for high-stakes pitches. The thought made her stomach twist. She crouched beside her son, smoothing his hair. "Hey," she said softly. "If anyone asks, you're my special assistant, okay? You're here to make sure I don't forget my big ideas." He grinned. "Do I get a badge?" "Maybe later," she said, kissing his forehead. Just then, the conference room door opened again. Everyone turned, and there he was, the CEO. Tall, silver-haired, always impeccably dressed. Known for his sharp questions and zero tolerance for excuses. He rarely came to these meetings unless it was absolutely critical. Her heart stopped. He scanned the room, then his eyes landed on the small boy sitting at the table, coloring with intense concentration. A beat of silence stretched like taffy. She braced herself for the storm. For the cold stare, the curt order to remove the child immediately, the walk of shame to HR. Instead, the CEO did something no one expected. He smiled, not a polite corporate smile. A real one, warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He walked over to the table, not even glancing at the adults, and crouched down to the boy's level. "Hey there," he said gently. "That's a pretty cool dinosaur." Her son looked up, wide-eyed. "He's got jetpacks. So he can chase clouds," the CEO chuckled. "Smart design. Clouds are sneaky." Then, without hesitation, he reached out and picked the boy up just like that. and settled him on his hip as if he'd done it 100 times before. The room was utterly silent. She stood frozen, mouth slightly open, tears pricking her eyes. The CEO looked at her then, not with judgment, but with something softer. Understanding, maybe. "You stay," he said simply. "Nail this pitch. I'll take him to my office. He can draw me a whole fleet of jetpack dinosaurs while I check emails." And just like that, the impossible choice she'd carried all morning, the guilt, the fear, the crushing weight of doing it all alone, lifted, if only for a moment. She nodded, unable to speak. As the CEO walked out with her son chattering happily about T-Rex pilots, she took a shaky breath, straightened her blazer, and turned back to her laptop. For the first time all day, she felt like she might actually make it. The moment the CEO walked out with her son, the air in the conference room shifted. It wasn't just quiet, it was stunned silence, the kind that hums with disbelief. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause mid-drip. She stood there, hands still slightly trembling, heart pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. She wanted to run after them, to make sure her boy was okay, to thank the man who'd just done the unthinkable. But she couldn't. Not yet. The client was due in 10 minutes. She took a slow breath, the kind her therapist had taught her for panic moments. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She smoothed her blouse, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and walked to the head of the table like she belonged there. Because she did. She'd earned this seat. She just hadn't expected to earn it while dragging the weight of motherhood behind her like an anchor. Her manager finally broke the silence. "I didn't see that coming," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "None of us did," someone else said quietly. She didn't respond. She opened her laptop, clicked through her slides one last time, and checked the projector. Everything was ready. But her mind kept drifting, to the way the CEO had looked at her son, not like a disruption, but like a person. Like a kid who mattered. At exactly 8:58 a.m., the client team arrived, 3 people in crisp suits, carrying leather portfolios and the kind of calm confidence that comes from never having to choose between a meeting and a sick child. She greeted them warmly, shook hands, offered coffee. Her voice was steady. Her smile felt real. Inside, she was still reeling, but she'd learned long ago how to hold 2 truths at once. "I'm falling apart and I've got this." The meeting began. She launched into her pitch, voice clear, posture confident. She spoke about market trends, consumer behavior, the unique angle her team had developed. She used data, yes, but also stories, real ones about people like her. People juggling too much, needing brands that understand their lives, not just their wallets. She didn't mention her son. She didn't have to. His presence, his absence really, was woven into every word. Halfway through, she noticed something strange. Her manager, who'd been tense and frowning earlier, was now leaning forward, nodding along. One of the client reps was taking notes with real interest, not just polite scribbles. The room felt different, lighter, like the air had cleared. She finished with a strong closing, clear next steps, measurable goals, a timeline that was ambitious but doable. Then she sat down, palms damp again, waiting. The lead client rep looked around the table, then back at her. "That was excellent," he said. "Honestly, one of the most human-centered pitches we've heard in a while. You didn't just sell us a campaign, you made us feel why it matters." She almost cried right there, but she just smiled and said, "Thank you. We believe marketing should serve people, not just profits." The rest of the meeting flowed smoothly. Questions, clarifications, even a few laughs. By 9:45 a.m., handshakes were exchanged, and the client left with promises to send the contract by end of week. As soon as the door closed, the room erupted, not in celebration, but in quiet awe. "That was incredible," one teammate said. "You killed it," another added. Her manager walked over. He didn't apologize, not exactly, but his voice was softer now. "You handled that really well. Under tough circumstances." She just nodded. "Thanks." But all she could think about was her son. Where was he? Was he okay? Had he asked for her? Had the CEO gotten tired of him and sent him to security? Her stomach twisted again. She checked her phone. No messages. She hesitated, then walked to the hallway and dialed the CEO's office line, something she'd never done before. The receptionist answered on the second ring, Hi, she said, trying to sound calm. This is Dub from marketing. I was wondering if my son is still with Mr. Reeves? There was a pause. Then a warm chuckle. Oh, he's not just with him, he's running the place. They've been drawing dinosaurs for the past hour. Mr. Reeves says he's got excellent strategic thinking for a 5-year-old. He asked me to tell you not to worry. They're fine. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Thank you. She walked back to the conference room, shoulders a little lighter. But the day wasn't over. She still had to face the aftermath. The whispers, the judgment, the unspoken question. What if she does this again? Back at her desk, emails started pouring in. Congrats on the pitch. Great job in there. Even a note from HR. Let's connect later this week about flexible work options. That one made her pause. Was this a shift? But then as she scrolled, she saw it. A message in the team group chat from someone she barely knew in finance. So, does this mean kids are allowed in meetings now? Asking for my dog, it was meant as a joke, but it stung. Because she knew what it really meant. You broke the rules and now everyone thinks they can too. She closed the chat. She didn't reply. She'd learned long ago that defending yourself only made you look guilty. At lunchtime, she finally worked up the courage to go to the executive floor. The elevator ride felt longer this time. She smoothed her clothes again, took a breath, and stepped out. The CEO's office door was slightly ajar. She knocked softly. Come in, a voice called. She pushed the door open. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Her son was sitting cross-legged on the plush rug, surrounded by papers covered in colorful drawings. The CEO was on the floor beside him wearing reading glasses, holding a red crayon. He was carefully adding flames to a dragon's mouth while her son gave instructions. More fire, the boy said. It has to scare the robot pirates. The CEO nodded seriously. Right, strategic intimidation. They both looked up when she entered. Her son scrambled to his feet and ran to her. Mommy, Mr. Reeves says I can be CEO when I grow up if I learn math and share my snacks. She knelt and hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and crayons. That sounds like a good plan. The CEO stood, brushing crayon dust off his slacks. He didn't look annoyed or inconvenienced. He looked relaxed, happy even. He's been a great assistant, he said with a small smile. Helped me solve a budget issue with a drawing of a money tree. She laughed, but her eyes were wet. Thank you, she said, voice thick. Really, I didn't know what else to do this morning. He nodded, hands in his pockets. I know, and that was it. No lecture. No reminder about policy. Just 3 words that carried the weight of understanding. She stood, holding her son's hand. We should get going. I've got some follow-up emails to send. Of course, he said. Then, as she turned to leave, he added, By the way, your pitch was outstanding. The client called me right after. They're signing. She stopped, turned back. They are, he smiled. Because you spoke like a human, not a robot. That's what we need more of around here. She walked out with her son skipping beside her, chattering about how the CEO let him press the button on the fancy coffee machine. Back at her desk, she opened her email and saw the official notice. The client had approved the project. Full budget, immediate start. Her hands shook again, but this time from relief. Later that afternoon, as she packed up to leave, her manager stopped by her desk. Hey, he said awkwardly. About this morning. I'm sorry I was hard on you. I didn't realize. Well, I guess I forgot what it's like. She looked at him. It's okay. No, he said. It's not. You showed up ready to work, kid or no kid. And you delivered. That's what matters. She nodded. Thanks. That night, after her son was asleep, face smushed into his pillow, dinosaur clutched in his fist, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window. The city lights blinked below, endless and indifferent. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small beneath them. She thought about the CEO on the floor, coloring with her boy. Not because he had to, not as a performance, but because he saw a child who needed kindness and gave it freely. She thought about the pitch, the client's nod, the contract coming through. Not despite her being a mom, but maybe, just maybe, because of it. She hadn't planned for any of this. She'd just shown up, scared and exhausted, and hoped for the best. And somehow, against all odds, it had been enough. She sipped her tea, warm and bitter and sweet all at once. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Bills, schedules, the endless balancing act. But tonight, she let herself believe that maybe the world wasn't as rigid as she'd thought. Maybe there was room for messiness, for humanity, for kids in dinosaur boots and CEOs who remember what it's like to be small. She turned off the kitchen light and walked softly to her room. For the first time in weeks, she slept without setting 3 alarms. The next morning came softer than the last. No alarm blaring, no frantic texts, no preschool closure notice lighting up the screen like a red warning. Just the gentle gray light of dawn seeping through the blinds and the quiet sound of her son humming in his room. Already awake, already building a Lego spaceship that, according to him, ran on banana fuel and kindness. She lay still for a moment, listening. Not to the hum, but to the quiet inside herself. The tight knot of dread that usually lived in her chest before work was gone. In its place was something fragile but real. Hope. She got up, made coffee, and let him pick his own socks, striped green and polka dot purple. Perfect, she said, because they were. Because today didn't have to be perfect to be good. At the office, things felt different. Not dramatically so. No banners or applause, but in the small ways that matter. The receptionist smiled and said, "How's your little assistant doing?" A teammate left a dinosaur sticker on her desk with a note. "For your next big pitch." Even the coffee machine seemed to work better. But the real surprise came just before lunch. An email popped up with a subject line that made her heart skip. A quick chat. D. Reeves. She read it 3 times. It wasn't a summons. It wasn't formal. Just an invitation. And a time, 2 p.m. his office, she almost didn't go. Old habits die hard. For years she'd learned to keep her head down, do the work, never ask for anything, never stand out. Especially not as the mom who brought her kid. But something in her had shifted. Maybe it was the way he'd held her son like he was precious, not inconvenient. Maybe it was the fact that she'd nailed the pitch and no one could take that away. At 1:58 p.m., she knocked on his door. "Come in," he called. His office wasn't what she expected. Yes, there were awards on the shelves and a view that stretched across the whole city. But the desk was cluttered with notebooks, a half-finished crossword, and she couldn't help but notice a small stack of her son's drawings pinned to a bulletin board. One of them, labeled CEO Dino, showed a man in a suit riding a T-Rex through a sky full of stars. The CEO looked up from his laptop and smiled. "Thanks for coming." She sat in the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap. "Of course, and thank you again for everything." He leaned back, thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that morning. Not just about you and your son, but about this place." He gestured around the room. "We pride ourselves on innovation, on being forward-thinking. But our policies? They're stuck in the last century." She stayed quiet, listening. "I grew up with a single mom," he said, voice quieter now. "She worked 2 jobs. There were days she had to bring me to the diner where she waitressed. I'd sit in a booth with coloring books while she took orders. People weren't always kind. Some customers complained. The manager once told her to leave the kid at home or leave the job. He paused, eyes distant. She almost quit. But she couldn't afford to. So she kept showing up with me in tow, with bags under her eyes, with pride she barely had energy to carry. And you know what? She raised a CEO. Not because she had it easy, but because someone once in a while let her be human." He looked at her. "That morning, when I saw you standing there apologizing for doing your best, it reminded me of her. And I realized, we've built a workplace that pretends life doesn't happen, that kids don't get sick, parents don't worry, emergencies don't knock. But they do. Every day." She felt tears welling but blinked them back. "I just didn't want to let the team down." "You didn't," he said firmly. "You showed up when it mattered. And you did great work. That's what should count." Then he leaned forward. "I want to try something new. A pilot program. Emergency childcare support, on-site or subsidized. Flexible family hours for parents during school closures. Maybe even a quiet room where kids can stay during critical meetings with a staff member watching them." Her breath caught. "You're serious?" "I am. But I need someone who's lived this to help design it. Someone who knows what actually works, not just what looks good on paper." He paused. "I'd like you to lead it." She stared at him. "Me? Yes, you understand the problem. You've lived it. And you've got the smarts to build a solution that's both practical and humane." She didn't say yes right away. She thought about the extra hours, the meetings, the pushback she'd surely face. But then she thought of other parents, single moms, dads working overnight shifts, grandparents raising grandkids, who might one day walk into this building without fear, who might not have to choose between their child and their career. "I'll do it," she said. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into the project. She met with HR, finance, facilities. She surveyed co-workers, quietly at first, then more openly as trust grew. She heard stories. The nurse who missed her daughter's recital because no one could cover her shift. The new dad who pretended to be sick so he could stay home with his feverish son. The woman who almost quit when her daycare closed for a week and she had no backup. Each story felt like a piece of her own. She worked late, yes, but now it felt different. It wasn't just about proving she could keep up. It was about building something better. One afternoon, as she was reviewing a draft of the new policy, her son's preschool called again. Another closure. Her stomach dropped, but only for a second. This time, she didn't panic. She walked to HR and asked about the emergency childcare pilot. It wasn't fully launched yet, but they'd set up a temporary space in the old training room. 2 certified caregivers, toys, books, even a nap corner. "Go ahead," the HR rep said with a smile. "He's welcome." She picked him up, brought him to the office, and walked him to the bright, cheerful room filled with soft rugs and blocks and a fish tank bubbling in the corner. He looked around, wide-eyed. "Is this my new school?" "For today," she said, kneeling to hug him. "Be good. I'll check on you at lunch." He nodded, already heading toward a bin of plastic dinosaurs. Back at her desk, she didn't feel shame. She felt normal, like this was how it should have been all along. Word spread fast. Within days, 2 other parents used the emergency care. Then 3. Then a dad brought his daughter during a snowstorm and no one batted an eye. The change wasn't just in policy, it was in tone. People started asking, "Oh, how's your kid?" instead of "You're late again." Meetings began with, "Is everyone okay?" not just "Let's get started." It wasn't perfect. There were hiccups, budget concerns, scheduling snags, one grumpy senior exec who muttered about turning the office into a daycare. But the tide had turned. One evening, as she packed up, the CEO stopped by her desk. "Heard today went smoothly," he said. "It did," she said. "He drew you another picture." She handed him a folded sheet of paper. He opened it. It showed a tall building with people holding hands, some with briefcases, some with strollers, some with dogs. At the top, in wobbly letters, "Work where hearts live." He smiled, tucked it into his inside jacket pocket. "I'll keep this close." She walked out that night with her son asleep in the car seat, the city lights glowing like distant stars. She thought about how just weeks ago she'd been ready to quit. How she'd believed she had to hide her life to succeed in her work. Now, she was helping reshape what success even meant. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was fighting the system. She was part of building a new one. 6 months had passed since that morning, the one with the closed preschool, the trembling hands, the impossible choice. Now the office didn't just feel different. It felt alive in a way it never had before. Not louder, not messier, but warmer. Like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. The emergency childcare pilot had grown into something real. What started as a temporary room with 2 caregivers and a fish tank was now a bright, cheerful space on the 3rd floor, complete with books, art supplies, quiet corners, and even a little kitchenette for snacks. It wasn't open every day, only during school closures, extreme weather, or true family emergencies. But it existed, and that changed everything. She walked through the hallway one Tuesday morning and saw a dad she barely knew sitting on a tiny chair, helping his daughter glue feathers onto a paper bird. Across the room, a young woman from accounting was reading a story to her toddler while checking emails on her phone with one hand. No one looked ashamed. No one whispered. They just were. She'd been promoted 2 months ago, not just for the client pitch, though that helped, but because leadership saw how she led the family support initiative with quiet determination and real heart. She wasn't managing a team of marketers anymore. She was shaping culture, and it terrified her, in the best possible way. Her own son still came sometimes, usually during snow days or teacher work days, but now he had a badge that said Junior Innovation Consultant, a title the CEO insisted on. He knew where the good crayons were kept and had taught the caregivers how to fold paper into spaceships. He even had a favorite chair in the break room where he'd sit with his juice box and supervise his mom's coffee breaks. But the real shift wasn't just in the building. It was in the conversations. At a leadership meeting last week, someone had suggested cutting the childcare budget to fund a new software rollout. Before she could speak, the head of finance, someone she'd once thought was all spreadsheets and stern looks, leaned forward and said, "If we lose this program, we lose good people. And good people are harder to replace than software." No one argued. Later that day, she found a note slipped under her door. "My sister works at a company across town. She cried when I told her about our childcare room. Said she's been hiding her son's asthma attack so she wouldn't look unreliable. Maybe we can share what we've learned?" She kept that note in her wallet. One afternoon, as she was reviewing feedback from the latest employee survey, the CEO stopped by. Not in his usual brisk stride, but slowly, like he had something on his mind. "Got a minute?" he asked. She nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. He sat, hands clasped. "We've been invited to speak at the National Workplace Innovation Summit next month." She blinked. "Us?" "You mostly," he said with a small smile. "They want to hear about the program, from the person who lived it, built it, and made it work without blowing up the budget." Her stomach flipped. "Me? On a stage? With hundreds of people watching." "Thousands," he corrected gently. "But you don't have to say yes." She thought about it. Public speaking wasn't her thing. She preferred listening, observing, fixing things quietly from the back. But then she thought about all the parents out there, working double shifts, skipping meals to pay for daycare, lying awake, wondering if they're failing at both jobs. If her story could help even one of them feel less alone, wasn't that worth a little fear? "I'll do it," she said. The weeks that followed were a blur of prep, drafting her talk, practicing in front of her bathroom mirror, letting her son be her first audience. "You talk too slow, Mommy, make the dragon part louder." She didn't want to sound like a corporate spokesperson. She wanted to sound like herself. Tired, trying, sometimes messy, but always showing up. The night before the summit, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch with a cup of tea, scrolling through old photos on her phone. Her son as a newborn, her first day at this job, the blurry picture someone had snapped of her, and the CEO on the floor coloring that morning that changed everything. She wasn't the same person she'd been back then. She still worried. She still ran late. She still burned toast more often than not. But she no longer believed she had to hide her life to be taken seriously. The next day, she stood backstage at the convention center, heart pounding, palms damp. The MC introduced her. A marketing lead, a mom, and the quiet force behind one of the most human-centered workplace changes we've seen in a decade. She walked on stage. The lights were bright. The crowd was huge, but she took a breath and began not with data, but with a story. "I used to think I had to choose," she said, voice steady now, "between being a good employee and a good mom, between professionalism and being human. I used to apologize for my life like it was a mistake I'd made instead of something beautiful I was building." She told them about that morning. The fear, the shame, the moment the CEO picked up her son and smiled. Not as a grand gesture, but as a simple act of seeing someone fully. "And that's when I realized," she said, "the problem wasn't me. It was the system. A system that acts like people show up to work as robots. No kids, no worries, no lives outside these walls. But we're not robots. We're people, and people need support, not silence." She talked about the pilot program, not as a charity but as smart business. Retention went up. Absenteeism dropped. Employee satisfaction scores hit a 5-year high. But more than that, trust grew. People started speaking up, showing up as themselves. When she finished, the room didn't just clap. They stood. Afterward, strangers came up to her. Men and women, young and old, tearing up, thanking her, sharing their own stories. One woman hugged her and whispered, "I've been hiding my twins' school schedule for 2 years. Today I'm going to ask for help." That night, back in her hotel room, she called home. Her son answered, voice sleepy. "Did you tell them about my jetpack T-Rex?" "I did," she said, smiling. And they loved it. The next morning, as she boarded her flight home, she felt lighter. Not because she'd been on a stage, but because she'd finally stopped apologizing for existing as she was. Back at the office, things kept moving. The program expanded. Other departments started their own versions. Flex hours for caregivers, mental health days that didn't require a doctor's note, family-inclusive meeting guidelines. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when the system groaned under old habits, but the foundation was there. One Friday, as she was packing up early to take her son to the park, the CEO walked by her desk. He didn't say much, just handed her a thick envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Read it later," he said, already walking away. That evening, after bedtime, she opened it. Inside was a letter and a check. The letter thanked her for her courage, her vision, her relentless belief that work could be kinder. The check was a bonus, yes, but more than that, it was recognition. Not just for what she'd done, but for who she was. She folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the note from the coworker, the dinosaur drawing, the conference badge, proof that small moments could change everything. She turned off the lamp and stood by the window, watching the city glow. Somewhere out there, another parent was facing their own impossible morning, but maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to face it alone. And that thought, more than any promotion or praise, made all the hard days worth it. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the old city hotel, the kind with crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes and marble floors that echoed with every step. It wasn't the kind of place she ever imagined herself walking into in heels, let alone as a guest of honor. But here she was, smoothing the fabric of her dress with slightly nervous hands. Her son asleep in the car seat outside, wrapped in his favorite blanket, waiting for his grandma to take him home. She hadn't wanted to come alone. She'd asked if he could stay with her during the dinner, just in the back with coloring books and quiet snacks. To her surprise, the event planner said, "Of course. We've actually set up a small family lounge this year. Inspired by your program." She almost cried right there in the coat check line. Now, standing near the back of the room with a glass of sparkling water, she'd learned long ago that wine and early mornings with a 5-year-old don't mix. She watched the crowd swirl. Executives in tuxedos, designers in bold prints, journalists scribbling notes, and in the center of it all, on a small stage draped in deep blue fabric, stood the CEO. He wasn't giving the usual speech about profits or market share. Instead, he talked about people. "Too often," he said into the microphone, his voice calm but carrying, "we confuse efficiency with humanity. We build systems that reward perfection and punish real life. But real life isn't perfect. It's messy. It's full of school closures, sick days, and kids who show up in dinosaur boots when you're trying to close a $1 million deal." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the room. He paused, then smiled. A while back, someone in this company made a choice. Not the easy one, not the safe one. She chose to show up exactly as she was, with her whole self, including her child. And instead of turning her away, we chose to see her, to help. And in doing that, we didn't just keep a great employee. We changed what this company believes is possible. He looked out at the crowd, and for a moment, his eyes met hers. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the most powerful thing a leader can do is pick up a child and say, 'It's okay.'" The room fell quiet. Then slowly people began to clap. Not the polite golf clap kind, but real warm applause that built into something deeper, something like gratitude. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. Later, during dessert, a chocolate torte that was almost too pretty to eat, someone from a business magazine pulled her aside. "Your story's going in next month's cover feature," they said. "Redefining work when empathy becomes strategy." We'd love a quote, she thought for a moment. "Just say this," she said. "You don't have to hide your life to be good at your job. In fact, bringing your whole self might be the best thing you can do, for you, your team, and the people you serve." Back at the office the following week, things felt settled. Not flashy, not dramatic, but steady. The family support program was now official policy, written into the employee handbook. New hires got a welcome packet that included info on emergency childcare, flexible scheduling, and mental wellness resources. Even the break room had a new sign. "All humans welcome, kids, pets, on leashes, and big feelings included." Her son had become something of a mascot. Not in a silly way, but in the way that made people smile when they saw him. He knew the security guards by name, had a favorite barista at the cafe down the street, and once convinced the IT guy to let him test a new keyboard by typing Dino rules in all caps. She'd been offered a new role, Director of People Experience, but she'd asked to keep one foot in marketing. "I don't want to lose touch with the work," she'd told the CEO. "Empathy means nothing if it's not connected to what we actually do every day." He'd agreed. One rainy afternoon, as she was reviewing campaign mock-ups, her son came in with his caregiver for a quick visit. He'd drawn her a picture, a woman with a laptop, a kid on her lap, and a big sun overhead. At the bottom he'd written, "My mom is a hero." She taped it to her monitor, right next to the company's mission statement. That night, as she tucked him into bed, he asked, "Mommy, when I grow up, can I bring my kid to work too?" She kissed his forehead. "If you want to, and if your workplace is kind enough to let you." "But what if it's not?" he asked, serious now. "Then you'll help make it kinder," she said. "Like we did." He nodded, satisfied, and rolled over, already drifting off. She sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, watching him sleep. The same way she had that morning months ago when everything felt like it was falling apart. Only now it wasn't falling, it was rising. Slowly, quietly, like a seed pushing through concrete. She thought about all the parents out there still fighting the same battle, still hiding sick kids in the back seat, still lying about car trouble when daycare falls through, still apologizing for existing as whole people. She hoped her story reached them, not as a fairy tale but as proof. Change is possible. Not because one person is special, but because ordinary people, when given a little grace, can build something extraordinary together. The next week, she got an email from a small tech startup in another state. They'd read the magazine article and wanted to adapt the program for their team. Could she share her framework? She spent an evening typing up everything: budget tips, caregiver guidelines, how to handle pushback from old school managers. She hit send with a simple note: start small. Start with kindness. A few days later, a teacher from her son's preschool called. "We've been talking about workplace support for parents," she said. "Would you be willing to speak at our parent night? Just tell your story?" She said yes, life wasn't perfect. There were still late nights, missed school plays, moments when she wondered if she was doing enough. But the guilt, the heavy, suffocating kind, was gone, because she'd learned something vital. You don't have to do it all alone. And you don't have to hide to belong. At the company's year-end celebration, they handed out Culture Champion awards. Hers came with a small plaque and a note from the CEO. "For teaching us that strength looks like showing up, with your whole heart, and sometimes your whole child." She hung it in her office, not on the wall behind her desk where clients could see it, but on the side near the door. So every time she left for the day, lunchbox in hand, keys jingling, mind already on bedtime stories, she'd see it and remember. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. And that, more than any title or bonus or award, was enough. Now, when she walks into the office, she doesn't scan the room for judgment. She looks for connection. A tired parent getting a coffee. A new hire nervously asking about family leave. A colleague sharing a photo of their kid's first soccer goal. These are the moments that matter. She's still the same person who once stood in a conference room, trembling, apologizing for bringing her child to work. But she's also the person who helped turn that moment of shame into a movement of support. And somewhere, in another office, in another city, another parent is taking a deep breath, walking through a door with their child in hand. No longer saying sorry, but simply saying, "Here we are," and maybe, just maybe, someone will smile and pick up the child.